Forces Radio, BFBS, Hal Stewart here, hosting Totally Connected. My next guest has featured on the programme, I think, as much as me now in the past few months. It's been really, really nice chatting with Jane Allen. Welcome back, doing that solo charity walk. How's it going, Jane?
Hello, Hal. Well, we're up in the north of Scotland. It's going well, though it's been a pretty hard fight to get to John O'Groats a couple of days ago because of the really strong winds. But I have passed John O'Groats.
Woo!
It was 2,031 miles since leaving Portsmouth.
Woo is the noise you get from me. Many others who've been following your story will also be very pleased, but there'll also be those listening that don't have a clue what we're talking about. Can you tell me all about yourself before we go any further, please, Jane?
37 years in the service in the Royal Naval Reserve, and I started the Victory Walk from HMS Victory last October, and I'm walking anti-clockwise around mainland Great Britain, and I'm doing that for two naval charities, the Royal Navy Royal Marines charity and the Wren's Benevolent Trust. And the reason I chose the Wren's one particularly was because last year the Royal Navy celebrated 100 years of the formation of the Wren's, and I was the RN lead for that event.
That's fantastic. Something that obviously then means a great deal to you.
It does, and I think, although it's been incredibly tough this week, walking in very strong winds, I never want to lose sight of why I'm doing it. And I think later on today you're going to be speaking to one of the beneficiaries of the charity, which, to me, it makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Very much looking forward to chatting with a chap called Dominic Cardle. We'll speak more with him, as Jane correctly says, a little bit later on. So how long have you been walking in total now?
Misleading, but I started in October, but for some of that time I was still on duty for the Royal Navy, and as you well know, we had the Beast from the East, times two, so we've been off the road for a couple of weeks, but we started in October, and I'm up to officially about 150 days of walking. Incidentally, Hal, just to say, Frank, my husband who's in support, who's the former Royal Marine, as I've walked 2,031 miles, in support in the vehicle, he's done already double that. He's done 4,696 miles, to be exact.
Well, that's absolutely right. When you keep saying we, it is you and your husband in tow. He's been very much the support figure in the vehicle with you. So can you tell us maybe a little bit about some of the routes that you've walked, some of the highlights?
Certainly coming up to John O'Groats, I wouldn't describe it as a highlight. It's extremely tough. There is a trail which comes from Inverness up to John O'Groats called the John O'Groats Trail. It isn't yet a national trail, and they're trying to give it that, get it signposted as such, but at the moment it isn't. It has been vegetation as high as my shoulders, and I've almost needed a machete to get through.
Sounds like my garden.
It's worse than your garden, Hal, believe
you say that.
If you can get through some of that, then you can see fantastic scenery, and it's been worth every bit of the effort to get there. I think where it's got too dangerous on a couple of days, I've just had to pull myself off the walk, because if there's an offshore wind at 50 miles an hour, I'm not going to getting blown into the sea. I now start an interesting part. I've passed John O'Groats, and in fact, I'm sitting, as we speak, up in the vehicle at Dunnet Head, where I walked to yesterday, and that's the most northerly point of the British mainland. So I've visited already the most easterly at Lowestoft. I'm now at the most northerly, overlooking the Pentland Firth and the Orkneys. And I'm heading now across, in effect, the top of Scotland, and then start to go down the west coast, which will be interesting because it's a very wriggly coastline.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I know it quite well. And when do you finish?
We're planning to try and finish by December now because of the delays. We hope to be, by December, walking back into Portsmouth. But I must just tell you this, it's funny. Tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, we leave from Thurso to go on a train all the way down to Cornwall, because we have to attend a family wedding.
That couldn't really be further.
Like doing another John O'Groats Land's End. And I think that's the other thing I was just going to mention, that, as you know, about 11 years ago I did John O'Groats Land's End, and the route that time was 1,200 miles. As I've set off from John O'Groats this time, heading to Land's End, I'm not doing the most direct route, and we're sort of taking bets at what the mileage will be when we eventually get down to Land's End on the longest route possible.
That is a really interesting one. Have you got your own idea that you can share with us?
Well, I'm going for 2,200. I think it will be 2,200 miles to get me from John O'Groats to Land's End. So that means Frank's got to drive about 4,000 or so.
I hope you're wearing one of these step counters that everyone wears these days, so you know roughly how much you're doing each day.
Probably on an average day, I do about 43,000 steps.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. A lot of people will now be able to relate to that because so many people do track their steps. Jane, how can people support you?
The way to support is to look at the Victory Walk website, which is victorywalk.uk, and on there you can see where I'm going, where I've been, pictures, and the link to the donations page, and anything else they need to know.
Brilliant. We wish you nothing but the best, you of course, and your husband. Jane Allen, thank you once again for joining us here on Totally Connected.
And hopefully we'll catch up again soon, Hal. By the way, the last time we spoke, we were in Aberdeen, so I have made progress.
You have. You always do.
Thanks for that vote of confidence, and good luck when chatting to the beneficiary later.